80 million years ago, the ocean was a different kind of place. No ice at the poles, no whales, no familiar coastlines. A warm, shallow sea stretched across regions that are now dry land, calm and vast, and full of a life that has since disappeared so completely that almost nothing in today's ocean resembles it. Beneath that surface, something was moving, something that had no business being in the water at all, and yet had made it entirely its own. 20 million years earlier, its ancestors were small lizards walking along ancient shorelines. Then something extraordinary happened. In a geological instant, those lizards entered the ocean and transformed into the most dominant marine predators the world had ever seen. They spread across every ocean, every latitude, and every major marine ecosystem. They evolved a second set of teeth on the roof of the mouth, allowing prey to be pulled deeper into the throat once the jaws closed. Fossils of their descendants have been found on every continent, including Antarctica. And even in the final moments before the asteroid struck 66 million years ago, they were still thriving, still diversifying, still expanding. This is the story of Mosasaurus, the creature that turned the late Cretaceous oceans into its domain and became one of the most formidable predators the sea has ever created. Long before the first mosasaur slipped into the sea, the oceans were already old beyond imagination. Life had been experimenting within them for more than 3 billion years, reshaping coastlines, building reefs, and filling the water with creatures adapted to every depth and current. Yet during the late Cretaceous, between roughly 82 and 66 million years ago, Earth entered one of the most unusual chapters in its history, a chapter defined by warmth, water, and abundance on a planetary scale. There were no permanent ice caps at either pole. Sea levels stood approximately 200 meters higher than they do today, flooding vast portions of the continents. Shorelines occupied places that are now mountains, deserts, and grasslands. The familiar outlines of the modern world had softened beneath shallow seas. Water reached deep into the continents, creating marine habitats where no ocean exists now. Across North America, a broad inland sea divided the continent into two separate land masses. Known as the Western Interior Seaway, it stretched from the Arctic in the north to the Gulf of Mexico in the south. Warm currents drifted through its shallow waters, carrying nutrients, supporting enormous populations of fish, and creating one of the richest marine ecosystems the planet had ever seen. What is now Kansas lay beneath waves. What is now Alberta overlooked a distant shoreline. Far across the globe, another body of water dominated the map. The Tethys Ocean curved around the equator like a vast blue belt, connecting regions that today belong to different continents. Much of Europe existed only as scattered islands rising above the sea. Between them lay warm lagoons, submerged plateaus, and endless stretches of open water alive with movement. The atmosphere itself helped sustain this world. Carbon dioxide concentrations were several times higher than modern levels, trapping heat and maintaining global temperatures. Ocean waters remained warm even at high latitudes. Chemical cycles moved differently through the environment, influencing everything from plankton growth to the formation of marine sediments on the seafloor. Yet this was not an untouched paradise. The oceans were already crowded with predators. Long-necked plesiosaurs cruised through coastal waters. Giant sharks patrolled hunting grounds that had belonged to their ancestors for millions of years. Massive predatory fish pursued schools of prey through open seas. Every major role within the food web appeared occupied. Every opportunity seemed claimed. For millions of years, this balance held. Predators competed, prey adapted, and ecosystems continued their slow adjustments. Nothing in the fossil record suggests an empty throne waiting to be claimed. The top of the marine food chain was already populated by powerful and successful hunters whose lineages stretched deep into the past. That is what makes the next development so remarkable. The ocean did not appear to be searching for a new ruler. No obvious vacancy existed. No great collapse had cleared the way. The world inherited by mosasaurs was already functioning, already thriving, already crowded with specialists. Against that backdrop of abundance, a new lineage approached the shoreline. It came from a place that had produced countless reptiles before, but never anything quite like what would emerge. The stage was set not by emptiness, but by competition, and the sea was about to be reorganized by a creature that seemed to arrive from entirely the wrong direction. The story begins not in deep water, but at the shifting boundary between land and sea, along ancient coastlines where tides flooded mudflats and retreated again beneath a warm Cretaceous sun. Small reptiles moved through a world of mangrove like vegetation, shallow channels, and sheltered lagoons. Among them was a creature that would have attracted little attention at the time. It was not large, it was not dominant. It belonged to a lineage that seemed firmly rooted on land, known today as Dallosaurus. This early relative of the mosasaurs lived roughly 95 million years ago in what is now Texas. Fossils show an animal only about the size of a house cat, equipped with fully formed legs capable of supporting its weight on land. Yet it also possessed traits hinting at a second life in the water. Its skeleton suggests a reptile comfortable in both environments, spending time along shorelines where fish, crustaceans, and other small prey were abundant. What followed was one of the fastest large scale transformations known among vertebrate predators. Mosasaurs did not descend from fish, nor from ancient marine reptiles that had already adapted to ocean life. Their closest living relatives today belong to the monitor lizard family, the same broad group that includes the Komodo dragon. Their ancestors arrived at the water's edge, carrying a body plan designed for land, then reshaped it with remarkable speed. The fossil record preserves this transition in quiet stages. Limbs that once carried weight across solid ground gradually broadened and flattened. Bones became better suited for steering than walking. The tail lengthened and deepened until it formed a powerful vertical structure capable of generating thrust through open water. Even the skull changed. Nostrils migrated farther back, allowing breathing with less of the head exposed above the surface. Each generation carried small modifications, none dramatic on its own, yet together they redirected an entire lineage. Paleontologists describe this process as convergent evolution. Similar environmental pressures often guide unrelated animals toward surprisingly similar solutions. Much later, mammals entering the sea would undergo comparable transformations as they evolved into whales. Streamlined bodies, powerful tails, and adaptations for life offshore appeared in both groups despite their distant ancestry. Nature was not repeating itself exactly, but it was working from familiar principles. What remains uncertain is the force that initiated the transition. Shorelines offered extraordinary feeding opportunities. Coastal ecosystems concentrated life into relatively small spaces, creating reliable hunting grounds. Competition on land may also have encouraged exploration of new habitats. The expanding seas of the late Cretaceous created countless shallow environments where adaptable predators could thrive. No single explanation fully accounts for the shift, and the fossil record preserves outcomes more clearly than motivations. Across roughly 10 million years, the changes accumulated. The distance between Dallosaurus and later mosasaurs became increasingly difficult to measure in simple anatomical terms. One belonged partly to land and partly to water, The other belonged almost entirely to the sea. By approximately 82 million years ago, the transformation had reached its destination. The shoreline reptile had disappeared into its own descendants. In its place swam an animal shaped by currents, depth, and open horizons, carrying the inheritance of a lizard while living a life its ancestors could never have imagined. A skeleton can tell a remarkable story when enough of it survives. Long after muscle, skin, and blood have vanished, the architecture remains, preserving clues about movement, behavior, and the physical limits of an animal's life. In the case of Mosasaurus, those clues describe a predator assembled with unusual efficiency, as though millions of years of experimentation had been compressed into a much shorter span. The largest confirmed individuals reached lengths between 13 and 17 meters. Fragmentary remains hint that some may have approached 20 meters, though the evidence remains incomplete. Even at the more conservative estimates, these were enormous animals. Weight calculations suggest mature adults could reach between 15,000 and 20,000 kilograms, placing them among the heaviest marine predators of their age. Yet size alone does not explain their success. Many large animals have existed. Few were built quite like this. The body was long and streamlined, minimizing resistance as it moved through water. Unlike whales, which generate propulsion through an up and down motion of a horizontal tail, Mosasaurus relied on a vertical tail fluke. Recent fossil discoveries have revealed a crescent shaped structure remarkably similar to those seen in powerful open water swimmers. Each sweep pushed against the water with efficiency, allowing sustained travel across vast distances and bursts of speed when prey appeared. At the front of this body sat a skull that could exceed 1.5 meters in length. The jaws were lined with conical teeth curved slightly backward. These were not designed for slicing flesh into pieces. Their purpose was simpler and more effective. Once prey was seized, escape became extraordinarily difficult. Every movement backward drove the teeth deeper into the target. The mouth contained another adaptation rarely seen among large predators. Along the roof of the mouth sat a second set of teeth known as persigoid teeth. These worked in coordination with the jaws, gripping prey and drawing it deeper toward the throat. The mechanism resembles the feeding system used by modern pythons, where prey is gradually advanced inward through alternating movements of the skull. In Mosasaurus, this arrangement transformed the entire mouth into a conveyor system for securing struggling animals. The eyes reveal another layer of specialization. Large eye sockets housed eyes supported by structures called sclerotic rings, small bones embedded within the eye itself. These rings helped maintain shape under changing pressure and may have improved visual performance in dim conditions. Their presence suggests an animal comfortable in environments where sunlight faded and visibility became uncertain. Fragments of preserved skin have added color to the reconstruction. Microscopic pigment structures indicate countershading, a pattern common among modern marine hunters. The upper surface appears to have been darker, blending with deeper water when viewed from above. The underside was lighter, helping conceal the animal against brighter water near the surface. It was a simple form of camouflage, yet one repeatedly favored by evolution across unrelated groups. Even its metabolism appears unusual. Growth patterns preserved within bone tissue suggest a pace faster than expected for a traditionally cold-blooded reptile. Evidence points toward at least partial endothermy, allowing more stable body temperatures and sustained activity levels. The result was neither a typical reptile nor a marine mammal, but something occupying a space between familiar categories, a predator shaped for speed, endurance, depth, and relentless motion through the sea. Sometimes the most revealing evidence is not the predator itself, but the marks it leaves behind. Across ancient seabeds, preserved within shells and bones that survived tens of millions of years, are records of brief encounters that ended violently. Circular fractures, deep punctures, crushed edges, and broken surfaces remain frozen in stone. Together, they reveal that Mosasaurus possessed a feeding strategy far more sophisticated than raw strength alone. Estimates suggest that a large adult Mosasaurus could generate a bite force approaching 130,000 newtons, that placed it among the most powerful marine predators of its age. Yet paleontologists studying damaged fossils noticed something unusual. The destruction patterns did not resemble those produced by modern crocodiles, which often seize prey and tear it apart through twisting motions. The evidence pointed toward a different approach. One of the clearest examples comes from ammonites. These distant relatives of squid and octopuses carried tightly coiled shells that could exceed 1.5 meters in diameter. Their shells were not fragile structures. Built from layered mineralized material, they provided some of the most effective natural armor available in the late Cretaceous ocean. For many predators, they represented a difficult meal. Mosasaurus treated them differently. Recovered ammonite shells frequently display concentrated zones of damage where tremendous pressure had been applied. Instead of shattering randomly, many show circular puncture marks matching mosasaur teeth. Some specimens preserve multiple failed attempts around the same shell before a final successful breach. The pattern suggests repeated adjustments in bite placement, as though the predator was testing weaknesses and modifying its approach. Rather than relying solely on force, it appears to have combined force with precision. This behavior has attracted particular interest because it hints at a degree of hunting flexibility uncommon among large reptiles. The animal was not simply reacting, it was responding to resistance, altering technique, and continuing until the obstacle yielded. Such evidence is indirect, yet it paints a picture of a predator capable of more than automatic ambush behavior. The menu itself was remarkably broad. Fossilized stomach contents, isolated bones bearing tooth marks, and partially consumed carcasses preserved in marine sediments reveal an animal willing to exploit almost any available food source. Large fish appear regularly in the record. Sharks did as well. Marine birds that had abandoned flight for life on the water occasionally became prey. Even plesiosaurs, themselves formidable predators, show evidence of mosasaur attacks. The pattern extends further. Smaller mosasaurs sometimes appear among the remains found inside larger individuals. One notable specimen recovered from South Dakota preserved the bones of a juvenile mosasaur belonging to a different species within the stomach region of an adult. Cannibalism was not necessarily common, but it clearly occurred. In ecosystems dominated by opportunistic predators, any sufficiently sized source of protein could become a target. What emerges from the fossil record is not the image of a specialist tied to a narrow food source. It is the image of an animal that treated the ocean as a vast catalog of possibilities. Hard-shelled cephalopods, swift fish, fellow predators, and members of its own extended family all occupied the same category when viewed through the architecture of those jaws. The teeth were not merely weapons, they were tools connected to a predator, capable of exploiting nearly every opportunity its environment provided, transforming abundance itself into an advantage. Maps often create the illusion that the world is divided into separate places. Continents appear isolated from one another. Oceans seem bounded by coastlines, and distances feel immense. Yet, for much of the late Cretaceous, the sea connected nearly everything. Currents flowed across vast expanses of water with few barriers, linking distant regions into a single planetary system. Within that system, Mosasaurs achieved something almost unparalleled among large predators. They became everywhere. Their fossils have been recovered from every continent on Earth, including Antarctica. Remains have emerged from the phosphate deposits of Morocco, the chalk formations of the Netherlands, the marine sediments of Japan, the ancient seaways of North America, the rocks of Brazil, and coastal deposits in New Zealand. Even the frozen landscapes of Antarctica, now associated with ice and isolation, preserve evidence that mosasaurs once hunted there when the continent supported a much milder climate. This distribution reveals something important. Mosasaurs were not restricted to a single environment or climate zone. They occupied tropical shallows near the equator, cooler waters closer to the poles, enclosed inland seas, and open ocean environments far from land. Wherever marine ecosystems flourished during the late Cretaceous, mosasaurs found a way to become part of them. Part of that success came from diversity. The word mosasaur is often used as though it describes a single animal, but the family contained an extraordinary range of forms. Some species specialized in habitats very different from those occupied by their relatives. Rather than competing directly for identical resources, many evolved distinct strategies that allowed them to coexist across the same broad oceanic world. Plate carpus provides one example. More streamlined than many larger relatives, it appears to have been adapted for active pursuit in open water. Its body proportions suggest a predator built for efficient swimming and rapid movement through deeper marine environments. Globidens followed a different path entirely. Its teeth were rounded and robust, designed for crushing armored prey that would have been difficult for other mosasaurs to exploit. Hard-shelled animals became a specialized food source rather than an obstacle. Tylosaurus occupied yet another role. Long-bodied and powerfully built, it seems to have favored ambush hunting in shallower waters. Fossil evidence indicates a predator capable of striking large prey with sudden force, relying on surprise and momentum rather than prolonged pursuit. Each species represented a different solution to the same challenge of surviving in a crowded ocean. As mosasaur diversity expanded, these specializations multiplied. More than 40 known species eventually occupied marine habitats around the globe. Some focused on deep water prey. Others concentrated on coastal ecosystems. Some became shell crushers, while others remained generalist hunters capable of taking almost anything they encountered. Together, they formed something larger than a collection of species. They became an entire predator network, spread across a planetary ocean. What makes this achievement especially remarkable is its origin. The lineage began with relatively small shoreline reptiles. Within a comparatively short span of evolutionary time, their descendants expanded into nearly every major marine niche available to large predators. Few groups in the history of life have radiated so widely while maintaining such dominance at the top of the food web. By the height of their success, mosasaurs were not merely inhabitants of the sea. They had become one of its defining features, present across horizons so distant that an individual lifetime could never encompass the full extent of their world. Success in nature is rarely permanent. For millions of years, certain predators can appear untouchable, so well adapted to their environment that their position seems secure. Then, often without any sudden catastrophe or dramatic environmental collapse, a new competitor arrives. The ecosystem remains largely the same, yet the balance begins to shift. In the late Cretaceous oceans, that shift unfolded gradually enough to span millions of years, but clearly enough to leave a visible pattern in the fossil record. Before mosasaurs expanded across the globe, the seas already belonged to experienced hunters. Among the most successful were the plesiosaurs, a group whose history stretched back roughly 135 million years. They had survived changing climates, moving continents, and countless ecological adjustments. Some carried extraordinarily long necks, others possessed massive skulls, but all shared the distinctive four-flippered body plan that had served them so effectively across geological time. For a long period, plesiosaurs flourished. Then a subtle trend emerged. As mosasaur species became larger, more numerous, and more specialized, plesiosaur diversity began to decline. The overlap is striking. Rock layers recording the expansion of mosasaurs often record fewer plesiosaur species than those that came before. Direct evidence of systematic predation remains limited, and paleontologists are careful not to claim more than the fossils can support. Yet, competitive displacement has become the leading explanation. The two groups occupied similar ecological roles, hunted similar prey, and increasingly shared the same waters. The pattern appears elsewhere as well. One of the most formidable sharks of the late Cretaceous was Cretoxorhina, sometimes called the Ginsu shark because of its slicing teeth. Reaching lengths of approximately 7 meters, it had spent millions of years as a dominant marine predator. Its remains appear across a wide geographic range, suggesting a successful and adaptable hunter. Early in mosasaur history, interactions between the two groups become visible in the fossil record. Some mosasaur bones preserve tooth marks matching Cretoxorhina. These traces indicate direct encounters, perhaps failed attacks, scavenging events, or competition over carcasses. Yet as time progresses, those traces become increasingly rare. Meanwhile, mosasaurs continue expanding in size, abundance, and diversity. The decline of Cretoxorhina unfolds alongside their rise with remarkable consistency. Large predatory fish experienced similar pressures. Xiphictinus, among the largest bony fish ever known, could reach lengths of approximately 6 meters and was famous for swallowing prey whole. Fossils occasionally preserve entire fish inside its stomach, creating extraordinary snapshots of ancient feeding behavior. Yet by the later stages of the Cretaceous, its prominence faded as mosasaurs became increasingly dominant across marine ecosystems. What emerges from these overlapping trends is not a story of sudden extermination. The older predators did not vanish overnight. They persisted, adapted, and continued hunting for millions of years. But the center of gravity within the ocean was shifting. Energy, resources, and ecological influence increasingly flowed toward the expanding mosasaur lineage. By roughly 70 million years ago, the transformation was largely complete. The ocean still contained sharks, plesiosaurs, and giant fish, but the hierarchy had changed. Mosasaurs occupied such a broad range of habitats, prey types, and hunting strategies that they no longer appeared as one competitor among many. They had become the defining predators of their world, standing above a marine community that had quietly reorganized around their presence. Light disappears surprisingly quickly beneath the ocean surface. Even in clear water, colors fade one by one as depth increases. Reds vanish first, followed by oranges and yellows. Far below, the world becomes a landscape of muted blues and shadows. Eventually, even those disappear, leaving only darkness and pressure. For countless marine animals across Earth's history, that darkness offered protection. It provided distance from hunters above and concealed movement from searching eyes. Mosasaurus appears to have treated darkness differently. Its eyes were large compared with those of many marine reptiles, and within those eyes sat structures known as sclerotic rings. These rings, formed from small interlocking bones, helped support the shape of the eye under changing pressure conditions. Their presence suggests visual adaptations suited to environments where sunlight was limited and visibility reduced. Rather than remaining confined to bright coastal waters, mosasaurs seem to have been comfortable operating in dim regions, where many predators became less effective. Yet vision alone was unlikely to explain their success. Water is a challenging medium for sight. Suspended particles, turbulence, and low light can rapidly reduce visual range. Long before prey became visible, other signals would have been moving through the sea. One of the most intriguing clues comes from the skull itself. Anatomical features indicate that mosasaurs possessed a forked tongue and a highly developed Jacobson's organ, the specialized sensory structure used by modern monitor lizards and snakes. In living reptiles, this system functions by collecting microscopic chemical particles from the environment and delivering them to sensory tissues inside the mouth. It effectively allows the animal to sample chemical information from the world around it. In an ocean environment, such a capability would have been extraordinarily useful. Every swimming creature leaves behind a trail of dissolved compounds, microscopic particles, and biological traces. These signals spread through water currents long after the animal itself has moved away. A mosasaur, equipped with advanced chemosensory abilities, may have followed those traces across great distances, detecting prey hidden beyond the reach of vision. Its hearing appears to have been equally impressive. Studies of the inner ear suggest sensitivity to low-frequency vibrations, the type of sounds that travel efficiently through water. A large animal swimming, feeding, or struggling creates pressure disturbances that radiate outward through the surrounding sea. Long before a target could be seen, those vibrations might have provided valuable information about its location and movement. Researchers have also considered the possibility that mosasaurs possessed sensory capabilities functionally similar to the lateral line systems used by many fish today. Direct fossil evidence remains unavailable because such soft tissues rarely preserve. Even without a true lateral line, however, the combination of chemical detection and low-frequency hearing would have allowed the animal to assemble a remarkably detailed awareness of its surroundings. The result was a predator that did not depend entirely on sight. It could gather information from scent, vibration, movement, and subtle environmental changes. Darkness therefore became less of an obstacle and more of an opportunity. Regions that offered refuge from visually oriented hunters may have become productive hunting grounds instead. For hundreds of millions of years, descending into deeper water often reduced the risk of encountering predators from above. By the late Cretaceous, that ancient strategy no longer guaranteed safety. In the sensory world of Mosasaurus, the absence of light did not mean the absence of detection. It simply shifted the search to senses that traveled farther than sight ever could. Every dominant predator begins life as something much smaller. No matter how powerful an adult may become, there is always a stage when survival depends not on strength, but on avoiding becoming someone else's meal. For mosasaurs, that vulnerable chapter unfolded entirely within the sea itself, without the return to land that characterized the lives of many other reptiles. Evidence from exceptionally preserved fossils indicates that mosasaurs gave birth to live young. This reproductive strategy, known as viviparity, represented one of the most important steps in their complete transition to marine life. Unlike sea turtles, which still must crawl ashore to lay eggs, mosasaurs appear to have abandoned that dependency altogether. Their offspring entered the world directly into the water, already adapted to the environment they would inhabit from birth until death. The evidence is surprisingly direct. Several fossil specimens preserve tiny juvenile remains associated with adult body cavities, providing strong support for live birth rather than egg laying. These discoveries reveal an animal that had become so thoroughly marine that even reproduction occurred far from shore. No nesting beaches were required. No eggs sat exposed to weather, tides, or scavengers. The entire life cycle unfolded within the ocean. Newborn mosasaurs were far from helpless. Estimates suggest lengths between roughly 1 and 1.5 meters at birth, making them substantial animals by the standards of many marine predators. A juvenile of that size could already hunt fish and other small prey. Yet despite this advantage, youth remained dangerous. The ocean was crowded with predators, including larger mosasaurs. Size offered opportunities, but it also determined vulnerability. This created an unusual ecological pathway. A young mosasaur occupied a very different position within the food web than an adult. During its earliest years, it existed among the ranks of potential prey. Survival depended on growth, and growth came quickly. Bone histology provides insight into this process. Much like the growth patterns preserved in trees, microscopic structures within bone record the pace of development throughout an animal's life. Studies of mosasaur bones reveal extraordinarily rapid growth during the first decade. Energy flowed into expanding muscle, strengthening skeletons, and increasing body mass at a pace uncommon among large reptiles. By approximately 10 years of age, many individuals may already have reached lengths between 6 and 8 meters. At that size, the balance of risk shifted dramatically. Predators that once represented a threat became increasingly irrelevant. Opportunities expanded as hunting capabilities improved. The transition from vulnerable juvenile to major predator occurred within a surprisingly short portion of the animal's lifespan. Growth continued well beyond maturity. Maximum size was likely reached somewhere between 20 and 30 years of age, with some individuals perhaps living beyond 40 years. Throughout this period, each stage occupied a slightly different ecological role, creating a population structured across multiple layers of the food web. An elegant form of balance emerged from this arrangement. Young animals supplied food for larger predators, including older mosasaurs. Survivors grew rapidly, eventually joining the ranks of those same apex hunters. Population control, therefore, operated from within the species itself, rather than relying entirely on external pressures. The result was a life cycle perfectly suited to a world of abundance and competition. Mosasaurs did not need protected nurseries, isolated breeding grounds, or seasonal migrations to reproduce successfully. The ocean raised them from the moment they were born, carrying them through stages of vulnerability and growth until they reached the immense sizes that made them among the most formidable predators of the late Cretaceous seas. Today, Kansas is a landscape of grasslands, farms, highways, and wide horizons. Standing there, it is difficult to imagine waves rolling overhead or marine predators cruising through open water. Yet, beneath the soil lies evidence of a very different world, one in which the center of North America sat beneath a vast inland sea connected to distant oceans. For roughly 25 million years during the Late Cretaceous, a body of water known as the Western Interior Seaway divided the continent into eastern and western landmasses. It stretched from the Arctic Ocean in the north to the Gulf of Mexico in the south, forming a marine corridor thousands of kilometers long. At its greatest width, it approached 1,000 kilometers across. Although its average depth was only around 800 meters, relatively shallow by ocean standards, its scale transformed the geography of an entire continent. The seaway occupied a unique position within the ancient world, sheltered by surrounding landmasses, yet connected to global oceans. It became exceptionally productive. Nutrients circulated through its waters, supporting dense populations of fish, cephalopods, reptiles, birds, and sharks. Layer upon layer of life accumulated across its seafloor, creating the fossil deposits that continue to yield discoveries today. Among the richest of these deposits is the Niobrara Formation of Kansas. The rocks preserved there have produced some of the most complete mosasaur specimens ever recovered. Skeletons emerge with remarkable detail, sometimes preserving relationships between predator and prey that would otherwise remain unknown. Because of these discoveries, much of what scientists understand about mosasaur biology comes from animals that once lived hundreds of kilometers from any modern coastline. The ecosystem itself was crowded with formidable creatures. Schools of fish moved through open water in enormous numbers. Giant sea turtles crossed the seaway on long migrations. Above the surface, pteranodons soared on broad wings, occasionally plunging toward the water in pursuit of prey. Sharks patrolled beneath them, while Xiphactinus, one of the largest predatory bony fish ever known, hunted throughout the same environment. Mosasaurus occupied this community not as a visitor, but as one of its defining inhabitants. Fossil evidence links it directly to many of these animals. Bite marks appear on fish bones, turtle shells, and the remains of other marine reptiles. Stomach contents reveal a predator willing to exploit almost any opportunity presented by its surroundings. The inland sea provided a concentration of life that supported some of the largest mosasaurs ever known. One famous fossil captures this complexity in an almost story-like sequence. A specimen of Xiphactinus was discovered containing a large fish preserved within its stomach. On the bones of the Xiphactinus itself, researchers identified damage matching mosasaur teeth. The chain of events preserved in stone suggests a predator that had consumed prey only to become prey itself. It is a rare glimpse into a living food web rather than a collection of isolated fossils. The western interior seaway was therefore far more than a temporary extension of the ocean. It functioned as one of the great centers of late Cretaceous marine life, a place where ecological interactions unfolded on an immense scale. For mosasaurs, this was not a distant frontier or marginal habitat. It was one of the places where their dominance was most completely expressed, in waters that once covered the middle of a continent and supported one of the richest marine ecosystems Earth has ever known. The ocean is not a single environment. It is a vertical world layered one realm beneath another, each with its own conditions, temperatures, and inhabitants. A creature drifting near the surface experiences a very different existence from one moving hundreds of meters below. Light, pressure, and food availability all change with depth. Most predators specialize within a particular layer. Mosasaurus appears to have ignored those boundaries. For many years, paleontologists pictured mosasaurs primarily as surface and nearshore hunters. Their size and power seemed well suited to the upper portions of the water column, where fish, reptiles, and other large animals were abundant. As more fossils were examined, however, a different picture began to emerge. Certain anatomical features suggested an animal capable of operating far beyond sunlit waters. One clue comes from the skeleton itself. Bone density studies indicate that mosasaurs were adapted to repeated diving and resurfacing. Their skeletal structure appears capable of tolerating substantial changes in pressure, a necessary trait for animals that regularly move between shallow and deeper environments. Such adaptations are common among modern marine divers, where rapid shifts in depth place significant physical demands on the body. The eyes provide another piece of evidence. The sclerotic rings embedded within them were not only useful in low light conditions, these bony supports also helped maintain eye shape as surrounding pressure increased. In deeper water, where pressure rises steadily with every descent, preserving the integrity of delicate structures becomes increasingly important. The eye itself carried signs of an animal prepared for environments very different from those near the surface. Comparisons with living marine reptiles offer additional perspective. Modern leatherback sea turtles routinely descend to depths approaching 1,000 meters while searching for food. Although mosasaurs differed greatly in appearance and ecology, certain aspects of their anatomy suggest that substantial diving capability was well within their range. They possessed the size, physiology, and structural adaptations expected of animals comfortable far below the waves. At depths of around 200 meters during the late Cretaceous, conditions changed dramatically. Sunlight weakened to a faint glow. Temperatures dropped. Many surface predators rarely ventured into these darker regions. For countless marine organisms, deeper water functioned as a refuge from the dangers above. Entire communities evolved within this relative safety, separated from surface ecosystems by darkness and distance. Evidence suggests that mosasaurs cross that boundary regularly. Ammonites provide one of the clearest indicators. Many species spent significant portions of their lives in deeper marine environments. Crushed ammonite shells have been found among materials associated with mosasaur feeding, indicating that these animals were not merely scavenging occasional carcasses drifting upward. They were actively exploiting prey that inhabited deeper water. The strongest confirmation comes from geochemical studies of tooth enamel. Oxygen isotope signatures, preserved within mosasaur teeth, record the temperatures of waters the animals occupied during life. Some specimens contain values consistent with depths between roughly 200 and 400 meters. These findings provide direct evidence that mosasaurs regularly hunted far below the upper layers of the sea. Taken together, the evidence reveals a predator capable of moving through multiple worlds. It could patrol near the surface, pursue prey through open water, and descend into darker regions where armored animals and deep water species lived. Rather than occupying a single ecological zone, Mosasaurus stretched its influence across much of the water column itself, linking environments that many other predators experienced only in part. Long before any human ear existed to hear it, the ocean was already filled with sound. Water carries vibrations with remarkable efficiency, often transporting them much farther than air can. In the late Cretaceous, these underwater signals moved constantly through the sea, crossing enormous distances and connecting animals that never saw one another. The ocean was not silent darkness. It was an environment alive with movement, pressure, and noise. Reconstructing those ancient soundscapes is difficult. Acoustic paleontology remains a young field, relying on modern physics, living animals, and fossil anatomy to build informed models of vanished worlds. Even so, the emerging picture is striking. Many researchers suspect that the late Cretaceous ocean may have been louder than modern seas in certain regions, simply because it supported such extraordinary numbers of large marine animals. Every swimming creature generated sound. Fins displaced water. Massive bodies produced pressure disturbances. Schools of fish shifted direction in coordinated waves. Predators accelerated. Prey scattered. And countless interactions sent vibrations outward through the surrounding sea. These signals overlapped continuously, creating a dynamic acoustic environment that carried information far beyond visual range. Mosasaurus almost certainly contributed to this underwater chorus. Direct fossil evidence of vocalization does not survive, yet its closest living relatives offer useful clues. Monitor lizards communicate through hisses, low frequency rumbles, and other sounds produced during social interactions or displays. Mosasaurs inherited much of the same basic anatomy, making some form of vocal communication plausible. The structure of the inner ear strengthens this possibility. Studies indicate sensitivity to low frequency vibrations, precisely the range most useful for underwater communication. Low frequencies travel long distances through water with relatively little loss of energy. For a large marine reptile moving through an immense ocean, such signals would have been far more practical than higher pitched sounds that dissipate quickly. Within the western interior seaway, conditions may have amplified these effects. Shallow marine environments transmit sound differently from deeper ocean basins. Vibrations can reflect from both the seafloor and the surface, allowing certain frequencies to travel remarkable distances. A large mosasaur producing low-frequency sounds may have been detectable far beyond the horizon, long before visual contact became possible. Other animals almost certainly responded to these cues. Marine ecosystems are filled with creatures capable of detecting pressure changes even without specialized hearing organs. Ammonites provide an intriguing example. Although they lacked ears in the mammalian sense, their bodies were sensitive to movement and vibration within the surrounding water. The approach of a large predator would have generated detectable disturbances long before physical contact occurred. Movement itself became a form of communication. A rapidly swimming mosasaur created a pressure bow wave ahead of its body, subtly altering the water around it. Nearby animals could potentially sense these changes and react accordingly. Whether that reaction occurred quickly enough was another matter. Evidence preserved on fossil sea turtle shells offers a glimpse into these encounters. Some specimens bear healed bite wounds consistent with mosasaur attacks. The injuries show that not every strike succeeded. Certain individuals escaped, carrying the scars for the remainder of their lives. Those rare survivors suggest that prey occasionally detected danger early enough to evade a fatal outcome. Yet such fossils remain uncommon. Most traces left behind in the geological record tell a different story. The sounds, vibrations, and pressure waves of the Cretaceous ocean carried warnings as well as opportunities, but in many encounters, the predator arrived before those warnings could become an escape. A forest is not defined by a single tree, and the dominance of mosasaurs was never the achievement of one species alone. Behind the famous skulls displayed in museums and the giant predators that capture popular attention stood an entire family of marine reptiles, diverse enough to occupy nearly every major hunting role available in the late Cretaceous ocean. What we often call the mosasaur was, in reality, a sprawling evolutionary dynasty. The family Mosasauridae contained more than 40 known genera and hundreds of species spread across millions of years and countless marine habitats. Some were giants, others remained comparatively modest in size. Some specialized so heavily that they depended on a narrow range of prey, while others retained the flexibility to exploit whatever opportunities appeared. Together, they formed one of the most successful radiations of marine predators in Earth's history. Among the most famous was Tylosaurus. Reaching lengths of up to 14 meters, it ranked among the largest members of the family. Unlike many relatives, it possessed a distinctive blunt snout extending beyond the front teeth. Fossil evidence suggests This structure may have functioned as a battering ram. Certain skull injuries and damage patterns indicate powerful impacts delivered before the actual bite occurred. Rather than relying solely on its jaws, Tylosaurus may have stunned prey through collision, creating a brief advantage during pursuit. Platecarpus followed a different strategy. Smaller, typically around 7 meters long, it appears to have been built for speed and maneuverability. Its streamlined proportions suggest an active hunter adapted for chasing prey through open water. Eye placement may have provided enhanced forward vision, improving depth perception during pursuit. Where some relatives depended on ambush, Platecarpus seems to have favored movement, precision, and sustained tracking. Globidens occupied perhaps the most specialized niche of all. Its teeth looked unlike those of most mosasaurs. Instead of sharp cones designed to grip flesh, they were rounded and robust, almost spherical in shape. Such teeth were poorly suited for capturing large vertebrates, but exceptionally effective against hard-shelled prey. Sea urchins, mollusks, and ammonites that challenged other predators became ideal targets. Evolution had transformed globidens into a specialist crusher, sacrificing versatility in exchange for mastery of a specific food source. At the opposite end of the size spectrum stood Hanosaurus. Known primarily from fragmentary remains, it may have approached lengths of 17 meters, rivaling the largest confirmed Mosasaurus specimens. Although incomplete fossils make exact estimates difficult, the available evidence points toward an animal of extraordinary scale, one capable of competing among the largest marine predators of its age. Then there was Prognathodon, a heavily built hunter equipped with a deep skull and powerful crushing teeth. It occupied ecological territory similar to some larger mosasaurs, focusing on heavily armored prey. Fossils preserve evidence of violent encounters between individuals, including healed bite wounds attributed to other mosasaurs. These scars suggest a world where even apex predators occasionally became opponents. What makes this family remarkable is not simply the variety of forms, but the way those forms fit together. Different species divided the ocean by prey preference, habitat, hunting style, depth range, and geography. One lineage produced ambush specialists, pursuit hunters, shell crushers, and giants simultaneously. From a small ancestral lizard emerged not a single dominant predator, but an entire ecosystem of predators. The success of mosasaurs was therefore collective. Their rise reshaped the oceans because evolution did not create one hunter. It created many, each occupying its own corner of a world-sized sea. Some places preserve the past more faithfully than others. Across most of the world, time scatters bones, erases traces, and leaves only fragments behind. Yet, there are rare locations where ancient ecosystems seem to have lingered beneath the surface, waiting patiently for discovery. For mosasaurs, no place has revealed more than a region of Morocco that once lay beneath a vanished sea. The Oilad Abdoun Basin is often regarded as the richest mosasaur fossil deposit ever found. Today it appears as a landscape shaped by mining and dry terrain, but during the late Cretaceous it occupied a very different setting. Warm waters covered the region, forming part of the Great Tethys Ocean that stretched across much of the planet. Beneath the surface, life flourished in extraordinary abundance. The seafloor accumulated vast quantities of phosphate-rich sediments. These deposits originated through biological productivity on a remarkable scale. Nutrients circulated upward through the water column, fueling blooms of microscopic life that supported increasingly larger animals above. Fish, Cephalopods, marine reptiles, and countless other organisms thrived in an ecosystem sustained by constant replenishment from below. Those same phosphate deposits later became exceptional preservers of fossils. Bones settled into sediments that protected them from destruction and decay. As millions of years passed, entire fragments of vanished ecosystems remained locked within the rock. In some cases, preservation proved so detailed that researchers recovered evidence extending beyond skeletons alone. Skin impressions, traces of soft tissue outlines, and even stomach contents occasionally survived long enough to enter the fossil record. The result is an archive unlike any other. More mosasaur species have been identified from the Olad Abdon Basin than from any comparable locality on Earth. At least 15 distinct species are known from this single region, representing a diversity that hints at the true complexity of the late Cretaceous ocean. These animals were not arriving accidentally. The concentration suggests a location rich enough in resources to attract predators from across vast distances. Oceanographic conditions likely played a major role. Upwelling currents may have carried nutrients from deeper waters toward the surface, creating zones of exceptional productivity. Such regions become magnets for life. Small organisms gather first, followed by larger consumers, then by the predators that hunt them. Over time, the basin may have functioned as one of the most important feeding grounds in the entire Tethyan realm. Even now, the discoveries continue. In 2022, researchers described a remarkable new genus from Moroccan deposits called the Lassatitan. The name translates roughly as atrocious titanic sea monster, a title inspired not by imagination but by evidence preserved in stone. Its skull was massive, its teeth heavily built, and fossil remains associated with the animal included bones from sea turtles and plesiosaurs bearing unmistakable bite marks. These findings revealed a predator specializing in prey that were themselves large and formidable. Rather than feeding primarily on fish or smaller animals, Thalassoditon appears to have occupied the highest levels of the food web, targeting other marine reptiles in a manner that echoes the role of large terrestrial predators on land. What makes the basin especially remarkable is that it remains unfinished. Excavations continue year after year, and new specimens emerge regularly from layers that have not yet surrendered all their secrets. Each discovery adds another piece to a picture still being assembled. Beneath the phosphate deposits of Morocco lies not merely a collection of fossils, but one of the most detailed records ever preserved of an ocean that no longer exists. Many scientific discoveries begin with a search. Researchers plan expeditions, follow clues, and set out with a specific goal in mind. The discovery of Mosasaurus followed a different path. It emerged unexpectedly from darkness, carried upward from a place where no one was looking for ancient sea monsters. In 1764, workers excavating limestone near the Dutch city of Maastricht uncovered something extraordinary deep beneath the ground. Roughly 30 meters below the surface, hidden within rock deposited by a vanished sea, lay a skull unlike anything known at the time. It measured approximately 1.2 meters in length and carried an intimidating array of teeth. Even separated from the rest of the skeleton, it projected unmistakable power. The find arrived during an era when natural history was still developing its foundations. Fossils were known, but their significance remained uncertain. The great frameworks that would later explain evolution, extinction, and geological time had not yet been assembled. Faced with the Maastricht skull, scholars struggled to determine what they were seeing. For decades, the specimen passed through private collections and attracted the attention of naturalists across Europe. Some believed it belonged to a whale, others suggested a crocodile. Still others proposed unfamiliar fish or entirely unknown forms of life. Each interpretation reflected the limits of contemporary knowledge. There simply was no obvious place for such an animal within the accepted understanding of nature. Meanwhile, the skull acquired a reputation of its own. Its fame spread beyond scientific circles, becoming known well enough that it would eventually draw the attention of armies. In 1795, during the upheavals of the French Revolutionary Wars, French forces entered the Netherlands. By then, the Maastricht fossil had become a prized object. Accounts from the period describe French officers receiving specific instructions to locate and secure the specimen. The search became almost legendary. Stories circulated that local residents hid the skull to prevent its capture, concealing it within the city while occupying forces attempted to track it down. One frequently repeated account claims that French soldiers exchanged 600 bottles of wine for information leading to its location. Whether every detail of the story is perfectly accurate remains uncertain, but the central fact is clear. The fossil was considered valuable enough to inspire a determined effort to obtain it. Eventually, the skull reached Paris, where it entered the hands of one of the most influential scientists of the age, Georges Cuvier. Often regarded as the founder of comparative anatomy, Cuvier possessed an extraordinary ability to reconstruct animals from fragmentary remains. Examining the Maastricht specimen, he reached a conclusion that challenged prevailing assumptions. The skull belonged to a giant marine lizard. Today, that statement sounds straightforward, but at the beginning of the 19th century, it carried profound implications. This was a time before Charles Darwin, before evolutionary theory, and before extinction had gained universal acceptance as a scientific reality. Cuvier's interpretation helped demonstrate that entirely different worlds had existed in the distant past, populated by creatures no longer present on Earth. The famous skull remains preserved in Paris today, continuing to be studied more than 2.5 centuries after its discovery. Its legacy extends even further. The city of Maastricht eventually lent its name to the Maastrichtian Age, the final chapter of the Cretaceous period. In a quiet way, the place that revealed the first mosasaur also gave its name to the closing moments of the world that mosasaurs once ruled. Ideas can disappear as completely as species. Long before scientists understood extinction, many people believed that the living world had always looked essentially as it did in the present. Animals might be rare, hidden, or undiscovered, but the assumption remained that they still existed somewhere. The possibility that entire forms of life could vanish forever had not yet settled into human understanding. Into that intellectual landscape arrived the skull from Maastricht. By the early 19th century, the specimen had already attracted attention across Europe. Its immense size and unfamiliar anatomy resisted every attempt at easy classification. Unlike many fossils known at the time, it could not be comfortably matched to a living animal. The more carefully naturalists examined it, the more unsettling it became. It seemed to belong to a world that no longer existed. This challenge reached its most influential interpreter in Georges Cuvier. Working in Paris, Cuvier had developed a remarkable ability to compare bones and reconstruct animals from incomplete remains. He approached anatomy almost as a language, believing that each structure carried clues about the whole organism. When he studied the Maastricht skull, he recognized features unlike those of whales, crocodiles, or fish. The fossil represented something entirely different. His conclusion carried implications far beyond the identity of a single reptile. In 1808, Cuvier formally argued that certain fossil animals belong to species that had completely disappeared from Earth. Today, this seems obvious, but at the time it represented a profound shift in thought. Many scholars still viewed nature as fixed and permanent. Extinction raised difficult questions because it implied that forms of life could exist for immense spans of time and then cease to exist altogether. The Maastricht animal became one of the strongest pieces of evidence supporting that reality. It was too distinctive to dismiss and too thoroughly documented to ignore. Unlike scattered bones or fragmentary remains, this fossil presented a compelling case that something once lived which no longer had any living counterpart. As acceptance of extinction grew, another realization followed naturally. If creatures had vanished, then the history of life must be far longer and more dynamic than previously imagined. Earth could no longer be understood as a static stage populated by unchanging actors. Instead, it became a world of succession, transformation, appearance, and disappearance across immense stretches of time. This intellectual transition helped prepare the ground for later scientific revolutions. When Charles Darwin published his ideas roughly half a century later, the concept of extinct worlds already existed within scientific thought. Researchers had begun accepting that life possessed a history, and that history contained chapters radically different from the present. Without that foundation, evolutionary theory would have faced an even steeper path toward acceptance. Mosasaurus was not the first fossil ever discovered. Ancient peoples had been finding fossils for thousands of years. Nor was it the first fossil examined scientifically. What made it exceptional was its timing, its completeness, and its refusal to fit within existing assumptions. It arrived at precisely the moment when natural history was struggling to understand the relationship between the present and the distant past. In that sense, the significance of Mosasaurus extends far beyond the ocean it once inhabited. Its bones helped reveal that Earth possessed a history deeper than memory, older than civilization, and populated by creatures entirely absent from the modern world. The animal became more than a fossil. It became a doorway into deep time itself, allowing human thought to travel backward into ages that had previously been unimaginable. For millions of years, the oceans had seemed stable. Continents drifted slowly, species appeared and disappeared, and ecosystems adjusted to changes that unfolded across immense stretches of time. The rulers of the sea lived within that rhythm. Every challenge they faced came from predators, prey, competition, climate, or geography. Nothing in their evolutionary history prepared them for what arrived from space. 66 million years ago, an asteroid between 10 and 15 kilometers in diameter approached Earth on a collision course. Traveling at roughly 20 kilometers per second, it struck near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The impact occurred in an instant, yet the consequences unfolded across the entire planet. The energy released exceeded anything produced by any natural event in recorded human history. Estimates place it at roughly the equivalent of 1 billion Hiroshima bombs. Rock vaporized. Seawater flashed into steam. The crust itself behaved momentarily like a liquid under the force of the collision. Within hours, the effects spread far beyond the impact site. A fireball expanded across the atmosphere, while immense quantities of molten debris were launched into space. As that material fell back toward Earth, it re-entered the atmosphere at tremendous speeds. The returning fragments heated the sky across much of the globe. Forests ignited. Wildfires swept through ecosystems on multiple continents. Even regions thousands of kilometers from the crater felt the consequences of an event they never witnessed directly. Yet the most devastating changes were only beginning. Dust, ash, and sulfur rich material rose high into the atmosphere, forming a veil that encircled the planet. Sunlight diminished, days grew dimmer, weeks passed with dramatically reduced solar energy reaching the surface. Photosynthesis began to fail. The ocean responded rapidly. Surface waters cooled after the initial heat pulse. Sulfur compounds dissolved into seawater, increasing acidity in many regions. The familiar flow of energy that sustained marine ecosystems began to break apart. Tiny photosynthetic organisms, particularly phytoplankton, suffered first. Though microscopic, they formed the foundation upon which much of the ocean depended. As their numbers declined, consequences moved upward through the food web. Small consumers lost their primary food source. Predators that relied on those animals soon faced shortages of their own. Each level of the ecosystem weakened the next. The collapse spread not from the top downward, but from the bottom upward. Mosasaurus occupied the highest levels of this system. Its size and hunting ability protected it from competitors and predators, but neither trait could create food where none remained. For a time, large predators may have survived on dwindling reserves of prey. They likely outlasted many smaller species. Yet dominance offered no escape from a collapsing ecosystem. The geological record preserves the outcome with unusual clarity. Fossils of mosasaurs occur abundantly in rocks dating to the final moments of the Cretaceous. Above the boundary, marking the impact event, they vanish. No confirmed mosasaur fossil has ever been found in younger layers. The disappearance shows no sign of a prolonged decline. There is no evidence of a gradual retreat into isolated refuges or a slow reduction over millions of years. The pattern resembles a line drawn firmly across geological time. An animal that had expanded across the world's oceans, diversified into dozens of forms, and maintained dominance for roughly 20 million years, encountered a challenge unlike any it had ever faced. Within a span that paleontologists estimate may have been only a few thousand years, the dynasty ended. The oceans remained, but the rulers that had defined them were gone. Absence leaves its own kind of landscape. Long after the final mosasaurs vanished from the seas, the oceans still carried the consequences of their disappearance. The predators that had dominated nearly every marine environment for millions of years were gone, yet nothing immediately arrived to replace them. The world after the extinction was not simply quieter, it was unfinished. The catastrophe at the end of the Cretaceous had removed entire layers of the marine food web. Countless species disappeared alongside the giant marine reptiles. In the waters that followed, ecological roles stood vacant. For perhaps 1 to 2 million years, the oceans lacked the kind of large, globally dominant predators that had previously defined them. Such a condition was extraordinarily rare in Earth's history. Since the distant Devonian period, marine ecosystems had almost always contained powerful hunters occupying the highest levels of the food chain. The survivors were not necessarily the strongest creatures of the previous age. Survival favored flexibility. Along many coastlines, large crocodilians continued to patrol estuaries and sheltered waters. Sea turtles persisted as well, carrying lineages that had already endured dramatic environmental changes. Yet neither group expanded into the empty role left behind by the mosasaurs. Sharks proved far more successful. Their history already stretched back hundreds of millions of years, and by the end of the Cretaceous, they had survived repeated planetary crises. The extinction that ended the age of mosasaurs became the sixth major ecological upheaval they endured. Once again, their resilience came from versatility rather than dominance. Many shark species required less food than giant marine reptiles. They matured more quickly, occupied a variety of habitats, and consumed a wider range of prey. When food webs collapsed, these traits became advantages. Rather than depending on a narrow chain of ecological relationships, sharks could shift their behavior and diet as conditions changed. While numerous species disappeared, enough survived to preserve the lineage and eventually expand into the recovering seas. The oceans rebuilding after the extinction were fundamentally different from those that had existed before. Phytoplankton populations gradually recovered, small animals returned, new food webs formed layer by layer. The process unfolded over millions of years, not generations. Each level of recovery supported the next, creating ecosystems that resembled the old world in some ways, while differing profoundly in others. During this slow reconstruction, another transformation was beginning elsewhere. On land, mammals that had survived the extinction as mostly small creatures were diversifying into new forms. Some remained terrestrial, others moved toward rivers, wetlands, and coastlines. Within roughly 10 million years, certain mammalian lineages began adapting to life in the water. Those early experiments eventually produced the ancestors of whales, seals, and sea lions. Their invasion of the oceans echoed a pattern seen many times in Earth's history. When land animals returned to environments their distant ancestors had once left behind. Yet they entered a world altered by extinction, opportunity, and absence. In a direct sense, the disappearance of mosasaurs created ecological space that later marine mammals would occupy. The oceans they inherited were no longer the warm inland seas and sprawling reptile-dominated waters of the late Cretaceous. They were becoming something new. Gradually, over millions of years, the foundations of the modern ocean emerged. The familiar balance of sharks, marine mammals, sea turtles, and countless fish took shape. The age of mosasaurs ended, but the vacancy they left helped define the seas that followed. Survival is often imagined as a reward for strength, yet the history of life suggests something quieter and far less intuitive. When worlds change slowly, power can be an advantage. When worlds change suddenly, entirely different qualities begin to matter. The extinction at the end of the Cretaceous removed approximately 76% of all species on Earth. Entire branches of life's history disappeared. Forests changed. Oceans reorganized. Food webs collapsed and rebuilt themselves from fragments. Amid that upheaval, some organisms endured, while others vanished completely. This contrast has led paleontologists to ask a reasonable question. If conditions had been slightly different, could Mosasaurus have survived? The answer begins with patterns observed across extinction events. Species that survive global catastrophes tend to share certain traits. Small body size is one of the most common. Smaller animals generally require less food and can maintain viable populations with fewer resources. Dietary flexibility is another advantage. Creatures capable of eating many different food sources often persist when preferred prey becomes scarce. Access to freshwater habitats can also provide refuge when marine ecosystems experience severe disruption. Some animals possess the ability to slow their metabolism, entering states of dormancy that allow them to endure long periods of environmental stress. Mosasaurus possessed almost none of these advantages. An adult Mosasaurus was among the largest predators of its age. Even conservative estimates place its mass in the range of many tons. Such a body required a constant supply of energy. Evidence from growth rates and metabolism suggests an active animal with substantial caloric demands. Under stable conditions, the rich oceans of the late Cretaceous could support those requirements. During a prolonged ecological collapse, however, that same size became a burden. Its feeding strategy created a second challenge. Mosasaurus was an obligate marine predator. Everything about its anatomy reflects specialization for hunting large oceanic prey. Fish, marine reptiles, ammonites, sharks, seabirds, and other animals formed the foundation of its diet. When the asteroid impact disrupted photosynthesis and reduced plankton populations, the consequences spread upward through every level of the marine food web. The prey vanished first. The predators followed. Unlike some survivors, Mosasaurus could not simply switch to insects, seeds, carrion, or small freshwater organisms. Its body and behavior had evolved within a specific ecological framework. The flexibility that often protects species during crises was largely absent. Freshwater offered little refuge. Many marine reptiles appear to have been physiologically tied to saltwater environments. Even if rivers and lakes remained comparatively stable, they would not have provided a realistic sanctuary for a giant open ocean hunter. Nor is there evidence that mosasaurs possessed any form of dormancy capable of carrying them through years of food scarcity. These limitations have led most paleontologists toward a similar conclusion. Even if the impact had been somewhat smaller, even if environmental collapse had unfolded less severely, Mosasaurus would likely have struggled to persist. The very traits that allowed it to dominate the oceans made it vulnerable when those oceans transformed. In the end, extinction was not a consequence of weakness, it was a consequence of specialization. Mosasaurus had become exquisitely adapted to a particular world. When that world disappeared, adaptation itself became a trap. The largest hunter of the late Cretaceous was defeated not by a rival, but by a planet that no longer resembled the one it had mastered. History is often told as a sequence of inevitabilities, as though every outcome was destined from the beginning. Yet the deeper scientists examine Earth's past, the more they encounter moments balanced on astonishingly narrow margins. The extinction that ended the age of mosasaurs may have been one of those moments. The asteroid that struck near the present-day Yucatan Peninsula arrived at exactly the wrong place for life on Earth. Its collision occurred in a region rich in sulfur-bearing rocks and shallow marine sediments. When the impact excavated those deposits, enormous quantities of sulfur and dust were blasted high into the atmosphere. The resulting veil dimmed sunlight across the planet and disrupted ecosystems on a global scale. Had the same object arrived only seconds earlier or later along its trajectory, the consequences might have been dramatically different. Some impact models suggest that a collision in deeper water would have reduced the amount of sulfur ejected into the atmosphere. The explosion itself would still have been catastrophic. Tsunamis would still have crossed oceans. Earthquakes and regional devastation would still have followed. Yet the prolonged darkness and climatic collapse that proved so lethal may have been less severe. In such a scenario, portions of the marine food web might have recovered more quickly. This possibility has led some paleontologists to consider an extraordinary alternative history. If enough ocean productivity had survived, perhaps mosasaurs could have endured. Their populations would almost certainly have suffered enormous losses, but extinction is not always guaranteed by catastrophe alone. Sometimes, survival depends on whether a small number of breeding populations persist long enough for recovery to begin. Imagining that recovery reveals a very different world. The great marine reptiles would have remained the dominant predators of the oceans. Their ecological position was not empty when the asteroid arrived. They already occupied the role of large, active, warm bodied hunters that controlled marine food chains across vast distances. As long as mosasaurs remained established, opportunities for entirely new groups would have been limited. The consequences might have extended far beyond the oceans. During the millions of years following the extinction, mammals diversified into forms that had never existed before. Some entered forests, others grasslands, and a few eventually returned to the sea. From those marine pioneers emerged the ancestors of whales, seals, and sea lions. Their success depended on ecological opportunities created after the disappearance of the dominant marine reptiles. A world with surviving mosasaurs may therefore have looked profoundly different. Large marine mammals might never have evolved beyond modest coastal forms. The oceans could have remained territories governed by reptilian lineages whose origins stretched back to shoreline lizards of the Cretaceous. The implications reach even further. Mammalian diversification on land accelerated after the extinction removed many dominant reptilian groups. That expansion eventually produced primates, and much later, humans. The path was neither direct nor predetermined, yet it depended upon environmental opportunities created in the aftermath of the impact. Seen from that perspective, the asteroid was not merely an ending, it was a redirection. The disappearance of mosasaurs altered the future of oceans, continents, and evolutionary possibilities. Their extinction and our existence belong to the same chain of events, separated by millions of years, but linked by a single moment when a stone from space found its mark. Long after the last mosasaur vanished from the oceans, another version of the animal emerged. This one did not rise from fossil beds or museum collections. It surfaced on cinema screens, in documentaries, novels, illustrations, and digital reconstructions. For millions of people, their first encounter with Mosasaurus came not through paleontology, but through popular culture. Its most famous appearance arrived in 2015 with the release of Jurassic World. The film introduced audiences to an enormous marine predator housed inside a gigantic aquatic enclosure. In one memorable scene, the animal launched upward from the water and swallowed a great white shark suspended above the surface. The sequence instantly became one of the most recognizable depictions of prehistoric life in modern entertainment. The spectacle succeeded because it captured something real about Mosasaurus. It was genuinely enormous. It truly occupied the highest levels of marine food chains. Fossil evidence confirms that sharks formed part of its diet. The broad silhouette, powerful jaws, and commanding presence shown on screen were inspired by a creature that actually existed. Yet the closer the comparison becomes, the more the differences begin to appear. The animal portrayed in the film was substantially larger than any confirmed specimen. Estimates place the fictional version at roughly 25 meters in length. Even the largest known mosasaurs fall well short of that size. While fragmentary remains hint that some individuals may have exceeded the dimensions of typical specimens, there is currently no evidence supporting an animal approaching the proportions shown in the movie. Its environment presents another problem. Mosasaurs were open ocean predators adapted to enormous marine ecosystems. Their lives unfolded across continental seas, deep offshore waters, and vast migratory ranges. A confined lagoon, regardless of size, could not realistically replicate the ecological conditions required by such an animal. The film enclosure functions as a dramatic setting rather than a plausible habitat. The hunting behavior shown on screen also reflects cinematic priorities more than fossil evidence. The famous vertical breaches resemble the feeding tactics of modern orcas and some large whales. Mosasaur anatomy suggests a different approach. Its body was optimized for horizontal pursuit, rapid acceleration through water, and ambush attacks delivered from advantageous positions. Nothing in the fossil record indicates repeated launches high above the surface in pursuit of airborne prey. These inaccuracies are understandable. Popular storytelling often amplifies scale and behavior to create memorable moments, yet an interesting pattern appears whenever prehistoric animals are adapted for entertainment. Humans tend to exaggerate what already seems extraordinary. The real Mosasaurus hardly required embellishment. It was a warm-bodied marine reptile capable of crossing oceans. It gave birth to live young far from shore. It navigated through chemical traces carried in seawater. It hunted in dim depths, crushed armored prey, and occupied ecosystems stretching from Antarctica to the tropics. Its entire lineage transformed from shoreline lizards into dominant marine predators within roughly 10 million years. That reality reveals something curious about the way we imagine the distant past. Fiction often assumes prehistoric life must be made larger, louder, or more dramatic to inspire wonder. Yet the fossil record repeatedly suggests the opposite. The deeper scientists look, the stranger the real world becomes. In that sense, the gap between the cinematic Mosasaurus and the historical one tells its own story. We do not exaggerate prehistoric animals because they are unbelievable. We exaggerate them because the truth is often difficult to imagine. Some animals become fixed in scientific understanding. Their fossils are collected, described, and eventually placed into museum halls where they seem to belong more to history than to active research. Mosasaurus has followed a different path. More than 2.5 centuries after its discovery, it continues to reveal new details about its biology, behavior, and place in the ancient oceans. This ongoing transformation is partly the result of new technology. Fossils once examined only through surface inspection can now be studied using advanced imaging techniques, microscopic analysis, geochemical sampling, and computer modeling. Questions that could not even be asked a generation ago have become testable. As a result, the last decade has produced one of the most productive periods in mosasaur research. A significant breakthrough arrived in 2013. Researchers studying preserved microscopic structures known as melanosomes identified evidence of countershading pigmentation in mosasaur skin. Melanosomes are tiny organelles responsible for storing pigment in living tissues. Their fossilized remains provided the first direct clues about the coloration of a Cretaceous marine reptile. The results suggested a dark upper body and lighter underside, a camouflage strategy familiar in modern sharks, dolphins, and many open water predators. For the first time, scientists could move beyond speculation and glimpse how a mosasaur may actually have appeared in life. Another major advance followed in 2016. Bone histology studies, examining microscopic growth structures preserved within fossil bones, revealed growth rates much faster than expected for a traditional cold-blooded reptile. These findings supported earlier suspicions that mosasaurs maintained elevated body temperatures through at least partial endothermy. Rather than behaving like sluggish reptiles dependent entirely on external heat, they appear to have possessed a physiology more compatible with active, wide-ranging predation. Research continued to reshape understanding of their senses. In 2017, detailed studies of inner ear anatomy demonstrated exceptional sensitivity to low-frequency sounds. The geometry of the auditory structures suggested an animal capable of detecting subtle pressure disturbances across large distances. Combined with chemical sensing and strong vision, this painted a picture of a predator operating within a remarkably rich sensory world. New species discoveries added even more surprises. In 2019, researchers described Xenodon's kalmancheri from Morocco. Unlike the familiar conical teeth associated with most mosasaurs, this species possessed blade-like serrated teeth resembling those of certain sharks. The arrangement suggests a feeding strategy focused on slicing flesh rather than simply gripping prey. It remains the only known mosasaur to evolve such a distinctive dental design. The surprises continued in 2022 with the description of Thalassodontan atrox. Fossils from Morocco revealed a massive predator whose teeth carried evidence of feeding on other marine reptiles. Tooth-marked bones of sea turtles and plesiosaurs indicated an animal occupying the highest level of its ecosystem, effectively functioning as a specialist hunter of large vertebrates. Most recently, studies published in 2024 used oxygen isotope analysis to refine estimates of diving behavior. The results pushed confirmed hunting depths to approximately 400 meters, significantly deeper than many previous reconstructions had suggested. What makes these discoveries remarkable is not simply their content, but their timing. An animal, first recognized in the 18th century, remains a source of entirely new knowledge. Each fossil, each analytical method, and each newly described species adds another fragment to a picture that is still incomplete. Even now, the story of Mosasaurus continues to grow, assembled piece by piece in real time. Long before any particular predator claimed the seas, the ocean had already established one of its oldest habits. It creates opportunity through disruption. Again and again, across immense spans of geological time, dominant lineages vanish, ecological space opens, and something unexpected arrives to fill it. The details change, the actors change. The outcome rarely does. Mosasaurus was one chapter in that recurring story. Its rise feels extraordinary because it happened so quickly and because its ancestry seems so unlikely. Yet the deeper pattern stretches far beyond a single animal. The ocean has repeatedly transformed creatures from entirely different origins into rulers of the marine world. Hundreds of millions of years before the present, the first vertebrates ventured into marine ecosystems that were still experimenting with complexity. Extinction events periodically interrupted those experiments, removing established players and reshaping entire food webs. Each collapse created vacancies. Each vacancy became an invitation. The Triassic oceans provide one of the clearest examples. After the devastation of the end Permian extinction, marine ecosystems rebuilt themselves from fragments. Among the beneficiaries were reptiles that had once lived on land. Within a surprisingly short period, some of these reptiles returned to the water and began evolving into forms unlike anything their ancestors had been. The ichthyosaurs emerged from that process. Over millions of years, they refined their bodies for speed, endurance, and long-distance travel. Eventually, some reached enormous sizes and achieved nearly global distribution. The ocean had taken a lineage shaped by terrestrial life and transformed it into a dominant marine force. Much later, the same broad pattern unfolded again. Along ancient shorelines, small semi-aquatic lizards explored environments where land and sea overlapped. They did not begin as giants. They did not begin as apex predators. Yet, ecological opportunity favored flexibility. Generation after generation accumulated adaptations that improved movement, hunting, efficiency, and survival in marine environments. Within roughly 10 million years, those modest shoreline reptiles had become mosasaurs, and among them emerged some of the most formidable predators the oceans had ever supported. The story repeated once more after the extinction that ended the Cretaceous world. The disappearance of marine reptiles left vast ecological space unoccupied. For millions of years, the oceans reorganized. Then another lineage, standing near the shoreline, began its transition. Small, hoofed mammals entered coastal waters and gradually adapted to aquatic life. Over time, they produced whales. Animals descended not from reptiles but from terrestrial mammals. Within approximately 15 million years, some whale lineages had become among the largest creatures ever to exist. The ocean once again demonstrated its remarkable indifference to ancestry. Viewed from this wider perspective, Mosasaurus appears less like an exception and more like evidence of a powerful evolutionary rule. When major disruptions remove established apex predators, the lineages closest to opportunity often respond with astonishing speed. The winners are rarely predictable in advance. What matters is not what they were before the transition. What matters is whether they possess the flexibility to exploit a changing world. For more than 540 million years, the ocean has repeated this process. Extinction creates absence. Absence creates opportunity. Opportunity reshapes life. Even now, the mechanism remains active. Along modern coastlines, evolution continues its quiet work, exploring possibilities, one generation at a time, beneath the surface of familiar seas. Some stories can be told through bones, others reveal themselves through numbers. When paleontologists attempt to measure dominance across deep time, they are forced to move beyond size alone. A predator may be enormous, yet geographically limited. It may be widespread, yet short lived. True dominance emerges where longevity, distribution, adaptability, and ecological influence overlap. By those measures, Mosasaurus occupies an unusually rare position in the history of life. The first confirmed representatives of the genus appear in the fossil record approximately 82 million years ago. The last vanish at the end of the Cretaceous, 66 million years ago. That span amounts to roughly 16 million years of existence. Written on a geological timescale, the number seems modest, yet comparison transforms its meaning. The entire history of the genus Homo, including every known human species, extends back approximately 2.8 million years. Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans all fit within that interval. Every tool ever shaped by human hands, every migration, every culture, every city, every civilization belongs to a timeline substantially shorter than the reign of Mosasaurus. The comparison grows even more striking when geography enters the equation. Today, Earth's oceans cover approximately 361 million square kilometers. During the Late Cretaceous, high sea levels created even greater marine connectivity. Vast seaways linked regions that are now separated by continents. Warm currents circulated across enormous distances, allowing marine predators to expand their ranges on a planetary scale. Fossils attributed to Mosasaurus and its closest relatives have been recovered from locations scattered across nearly every corner of the ancient world. Remains occur in North America, Europe, Africa, South America, Asia, Oceania, and Antarctica. These discoveries indicate not local success, but global reach. Wherever suitable marine conditions existed, mosasaurs appeared capable of exploiting them. On land, even the most celebrated predators rarely achieved such distribution. Tyrannosaurus rex, perhaps the most famous carnivore in history, occupied only a portion of western North America. Its known existence lasted approximately 2.5 million years. Within that territory, it was formidable, but its geographic influence remained limited by continental boundaries and environmental constraints. Mosasaurus operated under different conditions entirely. Oceans connected habitats separated by thousands of kilometers. Marine ecosystems offered fewer barriers to dispersal than terrestrial landscapes. As a result, Mosasaurus and its relatives expanded across an interconnected world of water that no land predator could match. Numbers also reveal another dimension of dominance. At the height of Mosasaur's success, more than 40 genera occupied different ecological roles simultaneously. Some specialized in crushing armored prey. Others pursued fast-moving fish in open water. Some hunted near the surface, while others ranged through darker depths. Together they formed a predator network that extended across nearly every marine environment available. This distinction matters. Dominance was not concentrated in a single animal occupying a single region. It existed across an entire lineage that had spread through the oceans with remarkable efficiency. Few predator groups in Earth's history achieved such breadth, measured in years, measured in territory, and measured in ecological influence. Mosasaurus occupies a category of its own. The predator most often remembered is not necessarily the predator that ruled the longest or the farthest. The mathematics of deep time tells a different story, one written across an oceanic empire that endured for millions of years. A skeleton can reveal remarkable things. It can preserve the shape of a jaw, the curve of a spine, the proportions of a limb, and even traces of growth recorded year by year within bone. Yet every fossil arrives with a silence built into it. However complete the specimen may appear, much of the living animal remains beyond reach. Everything known about Mosasaurus begins with physical remains. Paleontologists reconstruct its body from skulls, vertebrae, teeth, fragments of skin, and the occasional extraordinary specimen preserved under unusual conditions. These discoveries have allowed scientists to estimate size, growth rate, hunting adaptations, diving behavior, and even aspects of coloration. The picture is increasingly detailed. At the same time, some of the most interesting parts of the animal's existence leave almost no trace behind. Behavior is among the greatest mysteries. A tooth can reveal what an animal ate. A bite mark can reveal what it attacked. Neither can explain how individuals interacted with one another on an ordinary day. Whether Mosasaurus spent most of its life alone or tolerated the company of others remains uncertain. Its closest living relatives, monitor lizards, are generally solitary animals. Yet, some fossil populations display differences in size and body proportions that have led researchers to consider more complex social dynamics. Such evidence is intriguing but incomplete, leaving interpretation open. Communication belongs to the same category of uncertainty. Earlier clues suggest that mosasaurs could detect low-frequency sounds and navigate through chemical information carried by seawater. Those abilities imply a rich sensory world. Whether they used sounds to signal one another, establish breeding territories, or coordinate behavior cannot be determined from fossilized bone alone. The evidence stops just short of certainty. Vision presents another unanswered question. The structure of the eye indicates excellent visual capability in dim conditions, and many researchers consider color vision plausible. Yet, color perception depends upon soft tissues that do not survive the fossilization process. The ocean that Mosasaurus experienced may have appeared very different from the world visible through human eyes, but the exact nature of that experience remains inaccessible. Questions of intelligence are equally difficult. Fossil skulls preserve the space once occupied by the brain. From these internal casts, known as endocasts, scientists can estimate relative brain size and organization. Mosasaurus appears to have possessed a larger brain than many reptiles, though not approaching the proportions seen in birds or marine mammals. The evidence suggests an animal capable of learning, adapting, and solving practical problems. Beyond that, certainty fades quickly. Other mysteries are even more elusive. Did individuals return repeatedly to favored hunting grounds? Did mature adults defend particular regions of ocean? Did juveniles occupy separate habitats before reaching full size? Did mothers remain near newborn young after birth or depart immediately? The fossil record offers little guidance. This limitation is not unique to Mosasaurus. Every extinct creature is known through fragments, yet the scale of Mosasaurus makes the absence feel especially profound. For 16 million years, it occupied oceans across the planet, interacting with environments and animals that no longer exist. What science has recovered is extraordinary. What remains unrecovered is the vast texture of daily life, the countless moments that vanished without leaving a fossil behind. The reconstructed animal is impressive. The living animal was undoubtedly more complicated still. Some numbers resist intuition. They can be spoken in a single breath, written in a few symbols, or printed neatly on a page. Yet their true scale remains stubbornly beyond ordinary experience. 66 million years is one of those numbers. It appears simple when read aloud. It becomes almost impossible to grasp when translated into the reality it represents. Mosasaurus has been gone for approximately 66 million years. Entire mountain ranges have risen and eroded during that interval. Oceans have opened and closed. Continents have drifted thousands of kilometers from the positions they occupied when the last mosasaurs disappeared beneath the waves. The Earth itself has never stopped moving. One way scientists attempt to visualize such immense spans of time is through compression. Imagine Earth's entire history condensed into a single calendar year. The formation of the planet occurs at the first moment of January. The present arrives at the final second before midnight on December 31st. Within that scale, Mosasaurus survives until approximately December 29th. For most of the calendar year, its world still exists. The warm oceans, the inland seas, the vast marine ecosystems, and the immense predators that dominated them remain part of the living planet. Only during the final few days does the asteroid arrive and alter the course of life forever. Human history occupies a far smaller space. The first cities, the first written records, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the construction of monuments, scientific revolutions, voyages across oceans, industrialization, modern technology, and every event remembered by recorded civilization all occur within the final moments of December 31st. On this compressed calendar, the entirety of civilization occupies only a handful of seconds. Even the reign of Mosasaurus itself appears remarkable when viewed through the same lens. Its approximately 16 million years of existence translate into roughly 14 hours on that imaginary calendar. 14 continuous hours as one of the defining predators of the oceans. 14 hours during which generations rose and vanished while the lineage itself endured. The scale extends beyond Earth. While Mosasaurus swam through late Cretaceous seas, the solar system occupied a different position within the Milky Way. The galaxy has continued its slow rotation ever since. The stars visible above modern coastlines are not arranged exactly as they were during the final days of Mosasaurus. The differences are subtle to human perception, yet measurable across astronomical time. The ground beneath modern feet has changed as well. Continents that seem permanent are temporary arrangements of moving crust. Regions now separated by oceans were once connected. Landscapes familiar today would have been unrecognizable in the world Mosasaurus inhabited. Yet deep time is not truly separate from the present. The connection remains physical. The oxygen circulating through the atmosphere is renewed by biological systems whose ancestry extends deep into the ancient oceans. The minerals beneath cities were shaped by geological processes already underway during the age of mosasaurs. Countless atoms move through cycles far older than humanity itself. Seen from this perspective, 66 million years becomes something more than a number. It becomes a reminder that the present moment rests atop an immeasurably long foundation. Mosasaurus belongs to that foundation. Its world vanished, but traces of it remain woven through the planet that exists today. Quietly present beneath every familiar horizon, there is a temptation, when looking backward through deep time, to imagine extinction as something that happens only to the weak. The fossil record tells a different story. When Mosasaurus approached the end of its existence, it was not fading into obscurity. It was not a relic clinging to a shrinking world. Across the oceans of the Late Cretaceous, mosasaurs remained diverse, widespread, and successful. New species were still appearing. Established lineages continued to occupy vast regions of the planet. By every measure available to paleontology, they stood among the most effective predators Earth had ever produced. Nothing in their anatomy suggested failure. Nothing in their distribution suggested collapse. Nothing in their evolutionary trajectory hinted that the end was near. Then, the conditions changed. The lesson hidden within that transition is one of the most enduring patterns in natural history. Extinction is not always a verdict on quality. It is often a consequence of circumstance. A species can be perfectly adapted to the world it inhabits and still disappear when that world is transformed faster than adaptation can follow. Mosasaurus had become exceptionally refined for life in the oceans it ruled. Its body, senses, hunting strategies, reproductive biology, and ecological role all reflected millions of years of successful specialization. Every generation inherited solutions that worked remarkably well under existing conditions. Evolution rewarded those solutions again and again. Yet specialization carries a quiet cost. The more completely a species becomes shaped by a particular environment, the more dependent it becomes upon the continued existence of that environment. Stability becomes an unseen requirement. When stability vanishes, strengths can become liabilities. The animals that survived the end of the Cretaceous were not necessarily superior. In many cases, they were smaller, less demanding, and capable of exploiting a wider variety of resources. They required less energy. They reproduced more quickly. They could persist through scarcity in ways that large apex predators could not. Before the asteroid, such traits might have appeared unremarkable. After the asteroid, they became decisive. This pattern extends far beyond Mosasaurus. Again and again, across Earth's history, dominant groups have risen to extraordinary prominence only to vanish during periods of environmental upheaval. The great armored fishes of the Devonian disappeared. Many of the largest marine reptiles of the Triassic vanished. Entire ecosystems that once seemed permanent dissolved under changing conditions. Survival repeatedly favored flexibility over supremacy. The history of life suggests that evolution does not move toward permanence. It moves toward effectiveness within a particular moment. A species succeeds because it matches its world. When the world changes, The criteria for success change with it. Mosasaurus mastered an ocean that no longer exists. Its reign was immense, measured not in centuries or millennia, but in millions of years. Across that span, it achieved a level of dominance few organisms have ever approached. Yet even such dominance remained tied to the conditions that made it possible. Deep time reveals a recurring truth. No ecological position is guaranteed. No adaptation remains perfect forever. Every living thing exists within an environment that continues to shift beneath it. The story of Mosasaurus is therefore not a story about weakness overcome by strength. It is a story about change exceeding preparation. For a time, mastery was enough. Then the world became something new, and the rules that had governed success for millions of years quietly disappeared with it. Stand for a moment at the edge of a modern shoreline, and the ocean appears complete. Whales cross entire basins. Sharks patrol continental shelves. Pods of orcas move through cold currents with remarkable coordination. Sea turtles navigate migrations measured in thousands of kilometers. The system feels ancient, established, and whole. Yet, this ocean is not the one Mosasaurus knew. Between that vanished world and the present lies 66 million years of ecological rebuilding. The seas that exist today are the outcome of a long reorganization that began when the dominant marine reptiles of the Late Cretaceous disappeared. Entire food webs were dismantled and assembled again. New lineages rose into positions once occupied by creatures that no longer existed. The oceans recovered, but they did not recover into the same form. The apex predators that eventually emerged are impressive in their own right. Sperm whales can reach lengths approaching 18 meters and dive to extraordinary depths. Great white sharks possess senses refined through millions of years of predatory evolution. Orcas display social coordination so sophisticated that different populations have developed distinct hunting traditions. Yet none of these animals individually occupies the ecological role that Mosasaurus once held. Modern oceans distribute dominance across several lineages. Large sharks control certain regions and prey types. Toothed whales dominate others. Orcas influence ecosystems through cooperation and intelligence. No single predator spans the full range of habitats, depths, and feeding strategies represented by the great mosasaurs collectively. In that sense, the structure of today's oceans differs fundamentally from the late Cretaceous seas. Marine biologists and paleontologists occasionally use mosasaurs as a benchmark when discussing extreme apex predation because few living animals provide a comparable example. The mosasaur family occupied tropical waters, temperate seas, inland oceans, coastal environments, and deeper offshore habitats simultaneously. Different species specialized in different prey, different depths, and different hunting styles, yet all belonged to a single evolutionary radiation descended from shoreline lizards. Nothing alive today replicates that scale. The absence of Mosasaurus is therefore not merely a historical fact preserved in stone. It is an ecological absence. Every modern marine ecosystem developed in a world where that predator no longer existed. The shape of food webs, the distribution of niches, and the evolutionary opportunities available to later lineages were all influenced by the vacancy left behind. Some echoes of that ancient relationship may still persist in unexpected ways. Evolution often preserves successful responses long after the original challenge has vanished. Defensive body forms, migration routes, schooling behaviors, rapid escape reactions, and habitat preferences can remain embedded within populations across immense spans of time. Traits shaped by one predator may later prove useful against another, allowing them to persist through changing eras. Because of this, certain behaviors observed in modern marine animals may trace part of their history to dangers that disappeared tens of millions of years ago. The direct connection is often impossible to prove, but evolution rarely erases old solutions when they continue to function. The ocean remembers through inheritance. Beneath the movements of living whales, sharks, turtles, and fish lies a deeper continuity stretching across vanished worlds. Mosasaurus is absent from every sea on Earth today, yet the oceans it once dominated helped shape the evolutionary pathways that followed. The modern marine world is not simply what came after its disappearance. It is, in many ways, what grew within the space that disappearance created. Without realizing it, you inhabit the farthest consequences of a vanished ocean. Every object surrounding you belongs to a chain of causes stretching backward through immense spans of time. The room, the building, the city beyond it, even the species that constructed them, exist at the end of processes that began long before humanity appeared. Somewhere within that chain stands the disappearance of Mosasaurus and the world it once ruled. When the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous, it did more than erase a collection of species. It altered the direction of life itself. The dominant marine reptiles vanished. On land, non-avian dinosaurs disappeared. Ecological space opened across the planet. The survivors inherited opportunities that had not existed before. Among those survivors were small mammals. For millions of years, they diversified into forms that explored forests, grasslands, rivers, coastlines, and eventually every continent. Some climbed, some ran, some dug. Some returned to the sea. Among countless branches of that expanding tree emerged primates, and from one small primate lineage emerged humans. The room around you is therefore connected, however indirectly, to an extinction that occurred 66 million years ago. The connection does not stop with ancestry. The materials that compose the modern world are themselves products of deep geological recycling. Calcium atoms in stone, carbon atoms moving through living organisms, iron atoms weathered from ancient rocks, all have histories extending far beyond any human timescale. Matter circulates continuously through oceans, atmospheres, ecosystems, and continents. Nothing remains fixed for long. The water within your body carries perhaps the most direct reminder. Over geological time, Earth's water has been mixed, evaporated, frozen, buried, released, and circulated through every environment imaginable. The molecules moving through your bloodstream tonight have almost certainly passed through ancient seas, drifted through clouds above vanished continents, and moved through organisms separated from the present by tens of millions of years. Some fraction of that water once existed in oceans where mosasaurs hunted. The air entering your lungs tells a similar story. Oxygen is renewed generation after generation by photosynthetic life, yet the broader system that sustains it reaches backward through countless ecosystems. Ancient marine food webs contributed to cycles that ultimately helped shape the atmosphere inherited by later ages. Deep time is not distant. It exists within every breath, every drop of water, every atom exchanged between living things and the planet around them. Mosasaurus itself knew none of this. It possessed no awareness of geological ages. It could not anticipate catastrophe. It could not imagine extinction, mammals, cities, or the future. For 16 million years, it occupied its place completely. It swam through warm currents, followed prey through vast seas, reproduced, competed, and persisted within a world that seemed stable. Then that world ended. What remains remarkable is not the ending itself, but the continuity that followed. Life continued, oceans continued, evolution continued. The disappearance of one dominant lineage became part of a larger unfolding story that eventually led here. As sleep approaches, that perspective settles quietly over the present. The concerns of a single evening belong to a brief moment within a much longer narrative. Around and within you are materials, histories, and consequences inherited from worlds unimaginably older than your own. You are not looking back at deep time from the outside. You are one of its most recent expressions. Long after Mosasaurus vanished, the process that created it continued. The oceans did not pause to commemorate the disappearance of their greatest predators. Currents continued to circulate between continents, shorelines shifted, habitats formed and disappeared. Generation after generation of living organisms encountered new opportunities, new pressures, and new ways of surviving within an ever-changing world. Evolution remained at work. That continuity may be the most remarkable lesson hidden within the story of Mosasaurus. The animal itself was extraordinary, but the mechanism that produced it was not unique. Again and again across Earth's history, similar transformations have unfolded. A lineage encounters a changing environment. Individuals exploit a new resource or habitat. Small advantages accumulate. Over immense spans of time, descendants become creatures their ancestors could never have resembled. The journey that eventually produced mosasaurs began with reptiles living near coastal environments. Early forms still carried unmistakable traces of their terrestrial ancestry. Their limbs, skeletons, and proportions reflected a life that had not yet fully committed to the sea. Yet natural selection continued to shape each generation. Features useful in shallow water became more refined. Bodies grew more efficient for swimming. The boundary between land animal and marine animal slowly dissolved. What emerged millions of years later was one of the most dominant marine predator groups Earth had ever seen. The forces responsible for that transformation have not disappeared. At this very moment, countless species occupy ecological margins where environments overlap. Some move between fresh water and salt water. Others divide their lives between land and sea. Coastal habitats, estuaries, mangrove forests, tidal flats, and river mouths remain places where evolutionary experiments unfold continuously. Most of those experiments will lead nowhere. Many lineages will remain essentially unchanged. A few may discover opportunities hidden within changing conditions. The fossil record suggests this is how major transitions often begin. They rarely announce themselves. If someone had observed the distant ancestors of mosasaurs during their earliest stages, nothing would have marked them as future rulers of the oceans. They would have appeared ordinary, one small lineage among many. The immense consequences of their evolutionary path remained invisible because those consequences existed only in the future. The same principle applies today. Somewhere along the world's shorelines, organisms are adapting to pressures unique to their environments. Their descendants may remain obscure, they may vanish entirely, or they may eventually occupy ecological roles that do not yet exist. Deep time offers no certainty regarding which path will unfold. What it does reveal is a persistent pattern. The oceans repeatedly generate unexpected outcomes from familiar beginnings. They transform shoreline wanderers into open water specialists. They elevate obscure groups into dominant ones. They dismantle successful lineages and create opportunities for others. Across more than 500 million years, this cycle has continued through changing continents, changing climates, and changing ecosystems. Mosasaurus was one chapter in that process, not its conclusion. The oceans remain unfinished. Evolution remains unfinished. The long conversation between life and water continues beneath every wave crossing the planet tonight. Far beyond human schedules and human concerns, the sea continues its patient work. It has been shaping futures since before there were eyes to witness them, and it shows no sign of stopping.